welcome to Resilience in the End, a weekly podcast that recognizes we're in serious trouble, but stubbornly focuses on how to find community and joy in the chaos. I'm your host, Polly, and today we're going to talk about the 100-mile diet challenge, why I'm doing it now in the, I guess we'd call quote unquote, hungry gap season, and why you should too. But first, a quick shout out to Ellen, who is the sponsor of this video. They bought me several coffees on buymeacoffee.com/polly.barks, I think. Not sure, in the show notes below. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ellen. People like you help me kind of keep the lights on this, what is essentially a passion project, and I really, really appreciate it. So let's start by talking about what actually the 100-mile diet is. Pretty obvious. I think the premise is pretty simple. It's exactly like it sounds. You only eat food that is grown or produced within a 100-mile radius of your home. Definition, I guess I would say, is pretty simple. The actual execution on it, depending on where you are, can be kind of tricky. I feel like I'm pretty lucky. I live in Indiana. I live in a very fertile area, but unfortunately, I live near farms and it's all monocropped. It is soy and corn that is not for human consumption. So even in a very agricultural area like this, it can actually be really hard to come by food actually grown within 100 miles. So when I say that I'm doing the 100-mile diet challenge, it definitely is a challenge. I think all of you can probably figure that out, but I think a worthy challenge. So I came across the challenge from this book, The 100-Mile Diet, A Year of Local Eating by Alisa Smith and J.B. Mackinnon. It's a pretty old book. I think at this point it's, gosh, maybe like 15 years old. I think it's from like the early 2000s, if I recall correctly. But, it's a pretty timeless, universal concept in sustainability. Eat food close to where you live and where it's grown. You can have a good understanding of growing practices, whether it's really organic, even if it's not labeled as organic, if you can go to the farm. And those pesky food miles, which are a significant portion of the CO2 emissions of the foods you eat, are reduced to a minimum. And for video users, I'm sorry, I really need a haircut. I'm messing with my bangs constantly and they look wild. Uh, I apologize. Maybe you should go listen to audio only for this episode. But anyway, so the 100-mile diet, eating food that is only grown or produced within 100 miles of where you live. Pretty simple concepts. Pretty difficult in execution, I guess. And if you're not sure conceptually of what that looks like, there are quite a few resources that you can just go to online and put in your address and it'll draw a 100-mile radius around you, which is pretty cool. The one that I use, if you Google map developers draw circle tool, you should find it. I'll also include it in the links below. But as you consider doing this challenge, I would go do that so you could at least have a look of what's included in your area. Suffice to say, 100 miles is quite a lot, and there are certainly places that you can draw from within that generally. And even if it's in your yard, a lot of my challenge is stuff that I grew or foraged on my property nearby. So certainly don't think that you have to buy all of this in the spirit of reliance. Try to do some of it yourself. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's talk about why we should try it. So, first and foremost, I think from a resilience perspective, it is unwise to continue relying on long, tenuous global supply chains. I think we saw that during COVID, right? That it is a pretty quick breakdown should there be gaps in that supply chain that fall apart. I think instinctually we understand that a really long supply chain means we can't possibly know everything that's going on there. And the more long, shaky, and mysterious the supply chain is, the more likely that there are some pretty serious ethical and sustainable violations going on. So the closer that we can get, the more we can have a connection to our food, an eye on our food, and kind of better monitor the systems that we're participating in. So from a resilience perspective, it obviously makes sense. But from a sustainability perspective too, it really is quite logical. We need to think about food miles. So food miles, I guess if you don't know, it's just the distance traveled by food items from production all the way to consumption to indicate environmental impact. So, again, we're thinking of soy that's grown in Indiana and shipped to China for processing and then shipped to Thailand for packaging and then shipped all across the globe for delivery. I'm not sure if that's exactly an accurate depiction of things, but that does happen a lot, especially with seafood. It's caught somewhere, it's shipped across the globe for processing and packaging, and then shipped out again. A very, very inefficient, very poor system. That means a lot of our food has kind of shockingly high food miles, even on processed food. And all of that has a really big impact on the sustainability of what we eat. A 2022 study shared by the European Commission found that when the entire food supply chain was considered in this particular analysis, researchers found that global food miles equated to about 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, higher than previously thought, which indicates that transport accounts for 19% of total food system emissions, and the transport of fruit and vegetables contributes 36% of food mile emission, around twice the amount of greenhouse gases released during their production. What that basically means is that anywhere from like one fifth to a little over a third of a food's carbon emissions across the whole lifespan come from travel and just come from moving it from where it started to where it needs to go. And that, aggregated to the whole is a gigantic amount of carbon being emitted. So the 100-mile diet, first of all, mitigates a lot of that travel simply because it's closer, right? Duh. But it also forces us to look a little more carefully at our food and forces us to pare down the menu, right? We're not just open to a full grocery store of unlimited options that are more globetrotter than we are. It really limits us into what we can buy and can access, forces us to think seasonally, think locally, think more minimally about how we consume food. And I think that really helps in reducing our carbon emissions as well. So, yeah, I mean, food miles aren't the only factor in your food's emissions, obviously, but it is a significant portion that could be cut down by sourcing more locally. And like I said, in addition, local food is just a more transparent supply chain. When you are going and buying a CSA and picking up that CSA directly from the farmer at a local farmer's market or on their farm, you are very easily able to track that. But if you are buying bananas from, I don't know, Brazil, good luck figuring out how sustainable and ethical that product really is. Good luck figuring out, exactly the journey it went on to get to your grocery store and just all of that. And so to me, again, this is like kind of that ethical dilemma you need to think of if you are vegan or if you do eat animal products. That's why I personally am comfortable sourcing like local animal products and sometimes drinking milk. For the sake of this Hungry Gap diet, I am sourcing local milk. I do not typically do a ton of dairy. Um, but, I would much rather buy milk from a local dairy that I can go and see the cows wandering around versus soy milk that was grown, processed, packaged, and shipped thousands of miles from around the globe, likely coming from workers who were severely underpaid and overworked in ways that I have no idea how to track. So yeah, I think the 100-mile diet also really, I think, helps in paring down ethical considerations so you can really focus on what is important to you. Like, for example, I am a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian my whole life. I would never choose to eat meat because I couldn't kill a cow, couldn't kill a chicken. So I don't think it's fair for me to offset that to somebody else. and also just doesn't interest me. I have other ways of being a healthy person without, killing an animal. That said, I have a little bit more of um an ethical okayness with getting eggs or getting milk from, chickens I can wave to, cows I can wave to when I drive down the road. So yeah, I think it helps kind of open up those ethical considerations and let you make some really informed choices. All that to say, the 100-mile diet, I have done it in times past for short periods, a couple weeks. This time I am committed to doing it for a month. It's my first week, and I am doing it in January in the very winteriest bit of the year in Indiana. And so I think it is, for me, how I've usually done it is in the height of summer where I can go to the farmer's market, get a CSA. I'm growing my own stuff. Everybody's overrun with eggs and goat's milk and cow's milk and what have you. But I wanted to try it a little differently now. So I'm doing it in this hunger gap because I think if I can do it now, obviously with supplemental food alongside what I can do now that I put up from last season, I think it should be much easier to carry on when it's prime growing season. The challenge now I think will make everything else feel much easier, and this is a practice I would like to continue on with moving forward. And on that note, let's talk about what I'm eating. I think this challenge is maybe a little trickier for me because I don't eat meat. I think if you eat meat, lots of local options open up. That said, it also probably would double or triple my budget, so I'm very happy to not do that. Right now, I'm doing eggs and a very limited amount of dairy, simply because I can't do soy right now, and, ironically, despite the fact that if I look out my window, I can see where a soy field was, last year, but I could not source, locally grown soy meant for humans within 100 miles. So, plus you can't convince me that the cursed monocrop that is soy is really all that great anyway, but again, a different discussion. So at some point, I'm going to have a blog post with a more pointed rundown of what I eat alongside some recipes. So you can get a look at some ideas if this is something that interests you. But I will also drop my spreadsheet in the show notes so you can have a look at my food, the source list, as well as how much it cost me, because I think that's pretty interesting and I like a good spreadsheet. But right now, for me, food is mostly fresh bread with sweet or savory toppings, cornmeal, again, topped with various goodies. I have lots of canned fruits from the previous season, dumplings like vareniki, things with potatoes, cherry fillings, ferments like sauerkraut, cold salads topped with walnuts, locally harvested, locally right out my window, harvested black walnuts, with kind of root vegetables, beets and carrots, tray bakes with homemade mayo for dipping, fruit crumbles, I don't know, lots of stuff. Honestly, like it's not a whole lot different than usual, just with better, more localized ingredients and slightly pared down in the spice category. So my exceptions are salt and coffee. Salt because uh, salt is life, and I don't have any reasonable expectations of harvesting that within 100 miles. Coffee, because I like coffee. Along, as I said, with any ingredients included in previous canning efforts, like vinegar for pickles or sugar for jams, as long as the base, like fruit or vegetable, was sourced locally. So yeah, I mean, I think it's boring. It's very simple. There are pretty limited, I'm getting from some farmers some fresh ingredients, but it's like root vegetables. Not the sexiest thing, but it is that's what we should be eating this time of year. So, yeah. So I think don't be scared by this experiment. I mean, maybe if you are used to a lot of convenience food and a lot of hyper processed food, it might be a little shocking, but I think if you have a basic grasp on cooking and, prepare some of your own meals and have grown and prepared with fresh produce and simple things, I think you will probably be okay. I do think the one thing that comes up with the 100-mile diet that is worth considering is the cost, because whenever I tell anyone about this, they're like, "Oh, isn't that expensive?" And on the one hand, kinda. I will say, for me personally, a lot of this challenge is offset by eating what I grew or saved from my fruitful season. In particular, the two most expensive things on my list, maple syrup and nuts, I processed and foraged myself. So that would have been easily another $100 added on in terms of sweetener and nuts and some kind of good fats. So I mean, it could be expensive if you don't have access to some growing stuff. I also have paid for some of this beforehand. I went to a local orchard and picked apples and strawberries and blueberries, so that cost is kind of ameliorated throughout the year. So sure, it's a little bit more, but I would say that my food costs for the month are under $300, which I think is very reasonable. Again, maybe add 100 or 200 extra dollars as you add more people, or if you would, need to stock up on a local sweetener, or I don't know, other things that you didn't save that I had on hand. But even like $500 to $600, I wouldn't say seems like a wild food budget for a lot of people. That's just my interpretation. But again, I do recognize that I paid a lot for this in terms of either labor or cash months ago. But some of the things I bought this month, like the 25-pound bag of local flour, will last me well beyond my month-long challenge. That said, I do think eating local can be a bit pricey if you are used to bottom barrel prices or have a really strict budget. Pound for pound, ounce for ounce, things are going to be more expensive than shopping at Walmart. That's just the way of it. And I will give the huge caveat that if my partner who eats meat were fully participating this, it would become prohibitively expensive to support his diet, even though he only eats chicken at home. And yes, we are considering chickens this spring for eggs and potentially more. So exciting. So I'm kind of ignoring that blaring fact, which to be honest suggests we should all be eating a lot less meat if you are a meat eater. But yeah, I think there are ways to do this even if you are on a super strict budget. I mean, as I said, I've done this for weeks in the past, when our monthly grocery budget for two people was like $300. So it's possible you not be able to do it perfectly or for a long time, but I certainly think that it is possible, particularly if you are willing to omit meat, because that frees up a lot of cash. And I also have a few other caveats to counter its expensive argument if we set aside meat. The first thing is that you'll be buying less. Unless you're in the most abundant season in a land where localized food is just like so overwhelmingly abundant and accessible and like just full of opportunities, your shopping list will be limited. You're not getting, pricier, exotic, out of season produce. You're getting the very basics that are available. You're getting beets for a couple bucks. You're getting some carrots. You're maybe getting some apples, in this time at least. Your shopping list will be extremely limited, which may feel uncomfortable, but that also helps your budget. And I also think, in the spirit of resilience and creating some leeway for yourself, you need to work a little harder to offset the most expensive items. I tap my own maples. There will be an episode on that coming soon. I realize that is not accessible to everyone, both in terms of like location and just accessibility of maples, but I will be tapping somebody else's maples this year, which I will talk about. So there's an opportunity if you're interested and live in the right area. Maybe more accessible is walnuts. Like I said, if I had to buy good fats, good local nuts, first of all, I don't even know where I would find that, to be honest, but it would be incredibly expensive. That would easily be one of the most expensive portions of my diet, but Harvesting nuts is so easy and free because there are tons of opportunity on public lands for you to do that. Again, growing your own herbs, people talk about a lot. Those are pricey at the grocery store. You can grow that, and there's your super localized 0 mile diet herbs. Nuts, foraging for greens, growing a couple of heirloom tomatoes for your sandwiches instead of buying. It does pay off to put in some sweat equity and get that figured out to save money on your budget. Again, in the spirit of resilience, all of this community. If you want money to solve your problems, you will pay more. But take the lessons of previous episodes, get scrappy. What can you barter for to get rather than paying cash? There are opportunities for sure that make local eating more accessible. Again, because like you can't barter with a super mega global conglomerate, but you can barter with Bob down the road. So my challenge for you is to consider the 100-mile diet. I think there are a couple ways you could play this. The first one is to end up playing around with the radius map and identifying resources that you can get 100-mile food from, whether now or later. Think of a few critical items in terms of like cost, flavor, food miles that you want to replace, and start with that. You could also dive right into a challenge. That would be super awesome. Definitely hop into the Discord that is in the weekly newsletter. I am going to set up a 100-mile diet channel, and I would just like to hear folks' experience with, either jumping all the way in or dipping your toes in. That would be really cool. I would encourage you in some way to engage with a more localized food system. I'll also include some resources for getting started, especially some books in the show notes. I would love to hear your thoughts on the 100-mile diet. Like I said, definitely hop into our Discord and, chat, ask questions, share cool things you found, because I think this is a really valuable challenge that we can all plan to dig into. Yeah, before I go, my joy of the week: snow. We had the first kind of good snow this week, and it was really wonderful. And I am just so here for actual winter, which means it will get cold, which means there will be maples to be tapped very, very soon. And I am so excited. So, yeah, I will leave it at that. I've talked long enough. I hope you'll consider the 100-mile diet and let me know your thoughts on it. And yeah, talk to you next week.